Hello, I'm Andrei Baikov, as most of you know, Vice Rector for International and Graduate Programs at this university. Please let me introduce today's speaker to you, whom I hope you enjoy really much, but enjoyment is probably not the right term for this. Even though intellectual joy does exist, I hope this is going to be useful, first of all, and maybe groundbreaking for some of you who are not quite familiar with formal modeling methods, quantitative analysis, which are actually making their way across the world, but are not that popular and that spread at this university in this country. So our today's speaker is Professor Yacek Kugler. He's a professor at Claremont Graduate University from California, used to be chair of the Department of Political Science there. Professor Kugler was a past president of International Studies Association and Peace Science Society. He was editor of International Interactions and editor of special issues of other very authoritative journals like Journal of Conflict Resolution and International Studies Review. Welcome to all the newcomers. Professor Kugler received his BA and MA from University of California in Los Angeles and PhD in political science from University of Michigan. All right, so Professor Kugler is going to deliver a 3-talk series starting today through Wednesday. The first lecture, the opening one, is going to be devoted to methods in political science. Tomorrow's lecture is going to be devoted to power transition theory, of which Professor Yacek Kugler is one of the founding fathers and most prominent and prolific authors. And the third one, due on Wednesday, is going to be devoted to nuclear deterrence in the face of current threats. So I really hope this is not going just to be a monologue, and after a presentation there's going to be a fruitful exchange of Q&A. We have an hour and a half for that. So please enjoy. I wish you luck. Please, Professor Kugler.
Thank you very much. I'm really very pleased to be here. And it's very nice to see that the combination of females and males is about equal. So we're finally getting into an equal world. And hopefully it'll be a more peaceful one. Okay, and this lecture is really about research design. It's very basic. So you shouldn't be surprised. And if I'm going too slow, just say, hey, we know that, move on. Okay. Anybody who wants to interrupt, please go ahead. This is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. Okay. So the first thing we need to know is when you study a subject, you need to describe it. Okay, that's what, if you can't describe it, you can't study it. So if you don't know what a tree is, it's very difficult to analyze it, even classify it, or do any analysis about its genetic characteristics. In political science, I would suggest 60% of our work is descriptive. You say, this happened, so-and-so said this to so-and-so, so-and-so, okay? And at the very end, you say, by the way, I think that this, okay? You do something. So we are still very early on in the scientific process. Description is important to give you insights about what you should do. It certainly is not a theory. Let me repeat that. Description is not a theory. Description is knowledge. So you could be a computer, and you can describe a lot more things, and that doesn't do any particular good for your theoretical understanding of the phenomenon. It's important to collect facts systematically. This is really weird. Okay. It's important to collect facts systematically and get the detailed information. If you get garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. Okay. So if you basically collect data which is unreliable and you make all kinds of inferences from it, you're going to get really bad results. So it's like a good journalist. A journalist is a perfect describer. Okay. They don't tell you anything beyond, I know what just happened, and it's really good for the past because you have all the details. The second part is explanation. Now, how do I explain this phenomenon? And that's where your insight comes in. All of us have different ways of thinking about the problem, and we want to explain it. I want to say that the reason, I don't know, War starts is because people are at balance, and when they're balanced, they're scared of each other, and consequently they're at peace because they hate each other all the time. Okay? But if I can find somebody really little in a dark alley, I will attack them. Okay? So therefore it's suggested to, for instance, small people, don't walk on dark alleys. Okay? Because you might run into somebody who's bigger. And it's plausible, right? That's your explanation for this phenomenon. That kind of explanation I just gave you is an inductive explanation. I observed that when people fight, usually the big guy attacks the little guy. It's not the little guy who attacks the big guy. I'm still thinking of the time that Haiti attacks the United States. It just doesn't happen. Okay? Usually it's the other way around. And it's the same thing for Russia. Okay? So now you have an inductive explanation. It's plausible, right? And now you can go and collect data and do things with it. But you don't explain it. You have just created a theory which is external to this phenomena, and you don't know why it happened. So any of you are biologists? Remember biologists used to get plants and they could classify them and they could separate them, and this is an orange tree which is different from an eucalyptus, and on and on and on. And they knew nothing about plants and collected millions and millions and millions of plants. And they're still sitting in your universities, you know, nicely dried up. Until somebody came up with genetic algorithms, genes. And they say, by the way, this one has this gene, and if I change it a little bit, I can make it into an eucalyptus. That's an explanation. Neat, isn't it? Nasty. Because all of the collectors are now unemployed. And all of the analyzers are now employed. Okay, so those are the guys who are making money. But any deductive model is good on the basis of its predictive capacity. You can make deductive models that sound really good, integrated. They explain anything you like, but they don't predict. What you're interested is to predict behavior. You want to know what will, if I do this and this and this, what will my opponent do? Not just theoretically, but after all, I think most of you are going to be in an applied environment, and you're going to say, if I do this and this and this, what will happen? Okay? And therefore, you have to be empirical. Much of the work that has been done up to now separated the two. There are people who do the math, there are people who sort of do the empirics, and they never meet. They don't talk to each other. And the reason they don't talk to each other is because they don't want to embarrass each other. Okay, the models don't work, and the forecasts are pretty poor. And finally, you're in a manipulative world. You're not simply trying to understand the universe, you're trying to change it. And that is a fundamental difference between the social sciences, and particularly the kind of work you are likely to be involved, and the simple understanding of physics. You can't change atoms, as far as I can tell. Maybe you can at some point, but that's not the objective. The objective is to understand how they interact. You are now trying to change the behavior of others. In this case, to advance the interests of Russia. And you're confronting people who are trying to advance the interests of whatever other country they're representing. So you're actually manipulating each other all the time. That's called politics. So you have to realize that you have an objective in your study. It isn't just neutral. It isn't like, I am Einstein and I just want to understand this. Okay? Is that clear? Yeah, good. Okay. So how do you come up to this stuff? If you don't have an idea, no matter what your technical skills, you're going to be a dummy. Okay? You're just going to have to be a well-trained dummy. Anybody in mathematics here? I don't want to insult anybody. Okay. If you're a pure mathematician, you're for practical purposes a dummy. You have no interest other than solving the equation. Okay. So if you are going to do something in the sciences, in the social sciences, you have to have an idea. You have to say, I believe, I assume, I'm going to put these things together and try to explain some kind of phenomena that you happen to be interested in. I happen to be interested in war. So I want to know why they start. So in order to do that, you have to operationalize concepts. You can't just talk, okay? And define and redefine. I just went to a conference in which I ran into my colleagues from France, and it took them 2.5 hours to define the notion of intervention, okay? After listening for 2.5 hours, and I'm not a patient person, okay, I asked them, because the big distinction was between interventions which are to protect the population and interventions which are not to protect the population. So I said, give me a single case in the last 20 years in which the intervener said he was not protecting the population. So I'm asking you the same question. Two and a half hours, yeah.
Well, when you define intervener, are you saying that we're intervening and we're protecting these people, or we're intervening to protect our own people?
No, you're going to Crimea, right? And are you now protecting Russians in Crimea? How many of you disagree that Russia is protecting Russians in Crimea? Let me see one of you saying no. Isn't that neat?
Because I actually have a pretty good point then in that case, if we're not protecting our own people per se.
Or somebody else.
Israeli and Palestinian crisis, we're intervening to protect our own people, but they're not on that side. We're just going to air.
Well, you haven't intervened in Israel, okay? But the notion is very important here, because if you can't distinguish it, you have 2.5 hours of discussion, and it's wonderful, and you can blabberize forever, and write 6 articles, and everybody's going to read it, and confuse yourself. That's it. It's a non-distinction. So your distinctions have to be operational. That is, if I define it, what do I operationally mean? So let me give you the definition of war. War has been defined by many. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people, right? Except here is somebody called Richardson, who happens to be a guy who studies the weather. And he says, I decide that a war is going to be measured by casualties. No casualties, no war. And then he says, an important war, he used a log. So he says, if you kill 100 people, limited, it's a trivial event. 1,000 people on both sides, medium war. 10,000, blah, blah, blah. That's what we now use. Now you know what a war is. But I know that there's a Cold War, and you know, and my colleagues will continue talking about it. No cookies, no death, no war. End of story. Then you can analyze it. If you can't define it, you can't analyze it. But it's much nicer the other way, because you can talk forever in Starbucks. Okay. At this point, you're going to have to make a fundamental theoretical decision. Am I going to just think about it, or am I going to derive it? The majority, in effect now, at least 80% of every article you've read in international politics is inductive. I think that balance is a good, I never derived anything. I just think it makes sense. I think rich people vote for Republicans in the United States, and I think poor people vote for Democrats. So how do I test it? You're going down the street, coming in through this door, and I say, are you rich or poor? And you say, well, I make so and so much money. Okay, Republican. Okay, I'm really poor, Democrat. Then at the end of it, you say, well, who did you vote for? And you find out that the majority of the people I put on this side are Democratic, majority of the people I put on this side are Republican, and wow, I have a theory. Isn't that sexy? Great, I've done it. Okay. And now we have created a hypothesis. The reason you create hypotheses is you must be able to falsify. Okay, let me repeat that. If the only thing you're doing is confirming your own belief, you're a describer, or you're in religion. You don't test God. You can't. But you certainly have a hypothesis. And the reason for a hypothesis is because you want to falsify it. You wouldn't advance an argument if you didn't believe it, would you? That would make you stupid, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm arguing that rich people love Democrats, right? That's made much sense to me, okay? So then you add to this hypothesis that, of course, rich people love Republicans because they lower taxes, and rich people like to keep their money, and people who don't have any money don't pay any taxes anyway, so what do? They become Democrats. See how sexy I am? Good. I am so impressed. Okay. That's where statistical tests come about. If you don't have statistical capacity, you will never be able to test your propositions. Let me repeat that. If you don't take statistical methods, you will never test your propositions because you will select cases that support your proposition. And there are hundreds of books which do that. Most historians do that. They say this, and then they select cases that fit their argument. The reason you want to have statistical analysis is because it forces you to randomize and analyze. So you could be wrong. And the idea is to falsify. And that is something we hate. Because here you spend a whole bunch of time making an argument, then you take the data and it doesn't work. So if you really believe in your data, as I will try to prove to you next time, you will continue making the argument, regardless of the data, because the argument is so sexy. I really like balance of power. I really like it. It's so simple. Any idiot could know it. It just happens to be wrong. Okay. But you then are realist, and you are this, right? And you play this game. This is why you use statistical analysis, to falsify your arguments. Let's go the other route. When you go deductive, that means you make an assumption about something. Assumptions cannot be tested. That's why they're called assumptions. So I assume that you're a greedy bastard. If I assume you're a greedy bastard, I assume I am a greedy bastard. Is that clear? I can't just make you bad and me good. So you can't say, Americans are greedy bastards, but Russians are nice. Or the other way around, okay? That's a false assumption. And people don't like it. Because when you make those assumptions, you create some deductions you like. And everybody likes those deductions. But then you create some deductions you don't like. And the deductions you don't like are just as consistent as the deductions you like. You can't take one and get not the other one. Is that clear? It forces you to think. When you have inconsistent results, it means your assumptions are wrong. And then you have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. That's why we don't do that. That's why physics now has 8 dimensions and we have 1. They are scientifically far more advanced than we are. By the way, they started with 2. That's Newton. Okay. Then comes Einstein, the little funny hair, right? That's 3 because you added time. And our current physicists are running with 8 in order to get strings theory going. And we all say, oh, it's very difficult, I can't understand. Because you don't know how to do it. It's not difficult. It's simple. You're just untrained. That's it. And if you think human beings are more complicated than molecules, you shouldn't be running with models which have 1 or 2 dimensions. It's silly. But it's difficult. Anyway, moving along. Okay. When you test it, your statistics tell you either you are successful or you fail. And that's what we in academia at least say. If you're successful, you publish. And if you failed, even though you have just rejected the hypothesis, nobody wants to publish you. That's a punishment. So you had a bad idea. Unless it's a very well-established idea, in which case your failure allows you to throw that one out. But nobody really wants to throw things out. They want to innovate. That's why we remember Newton and we remember Einstein, and we don't remember the guys in between. Okay? So remember, if you have an idea, keep it, test it. If it works, publish it. Okay? Otherwise, I will steal it. Okay, so we got to 1 case studies. This is basically what most people do. The current situation in, where are we having trouble? Syria, is we just bombed on this side and the Americans are bombing on that side, and we're sort of bombing in between and we can't agree who we're bombing, and of course I'm saving the Assad, and no, I'm destroying ISIS, and blah, 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 and you can have a long discussion about this crap, and you know nothing. I ask you, how long? Right? Could it have happened? If you didn't, what would have happened? Okay. You have no theory. You are describing and describing and describing and describing and adding little things as you go along. Okay? Because description is not sufficient for explanation or for any relative progress. That's why I won't spend much time on it. But since I was in Russia, I couldn't pass this one. Okay, you may see this one. It's a famous graph, right? This is the invasion of Napoleon. Okay, see he starts over there. See that light line? That's the number of troops Napoleon had. And over there is Moscow. At the bottom is temperature. Okay, and you know, he goes to St. Petersburg. He goes all the way to Moscow. It has Borodino, boom, 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 right? You know that, right? And you know what happens next. He gets here, and he finds out the Russians didn't surrender as they're supposed to. This is unreasonable. I just got your biggest city, and you don't want to talk to me. You know, come on, this is not legal. Okay? So he says, well, I can stay over at winter, but what do I eat, right? I have a little problem. So he starts going back. See the dark line? Okay? And as he keeps going back, he keeps dying. You've heard it. You know, Tolstoy wrote a great book on that. I like it, except it's too long. Anyway, so as he goes back, okay, keeps on going, and you look at this down little chart in here, it tells you they're dying because it's cold. Is that a plausible explanation? By the way, you have the same thing for Hitler if you want to. Is that a plausible explanation? Come on, somebody, anybody? Yes? Of course not. Let me give you the following experiment. I'll take randomly 5 of you and assume that you're a Frenchman. I'll take 5 of you. I'll put you in a refrigerator, okay, and see who dies first. It's not a joke. It's an experiment. And I have the funny feeling that Russians would write, you know, depending on fact, okay, they will die about the same rate as the Frenchmen. The problem was completely different. The problem is technological. You had things called partisans, which made it very difficult for an army to walk back. And then you did something nasty. You burned all the food. This is unfair. The explanation is lack of food and partisan activity, not cold. Every single person who does this analysis, who is totally untrained, says cold. That is absurd. Same thing for the Germans. Remember the Germans? There's a great movie in which you see the German tanks going up towards, you know, Moscow, big things, you know, right? And then on the way back, they're sort of frozen, and Russians have these little tanks, trivial things, okay? Borrowed from Americans, I didn't say that, okay? Except they're running. They had oil, and they had heavy oil. They had good equipment, that is, you know how to dress for winter, and the Germans didn't. We lost in Vietnam because we were fighting in the jungle, and the other guys were fighting in little black shirts and, you know, dug in the hole when we were on top, bombed them all over, couldn't find them. Technological superiority had nothing to do with the weather or the jungle. If you believe that stuff, start not believing it, please. Okay, moving along. We have inductive theories. Inductive theories say it's a complicated stuff. You sort of look at this phenomena over and over and over at night, okay? And you say, I think this is the way it works. I think that conflict is likely when people are equal, because I want what you want, particularly if I'm controlling the international system. So now people, remember the balance of power, people said balance produces instability. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, your guys were little, relatively speaking, okay? How much major war was there? And listen, did we invade? Why not? Were we so scared of Gorbachev and Yeltsin? Come on. Now Putin, he's tough, okay? But you're disarming. We didn't know anything. Where is the falsification for balance? This one says, there's no reason to fight because I'm satisfied. So why should I fight you when you're little? Okay. I'm getting all of the goodies. I'm getting even more goodies. Okay. So live and be merry. When you get close to me, I have a probability of conflict. So if you listen to the current literature, the blabbadizing, okay, they're saying, well, when China comes up to the United States, there will be problems. Whoops. That, in my recollection, is balance of power. So you notice you can't have both. You have to falsify. Okay. I'm not saying this is right. I'm just simply saying, hey, give me the falsification position. Of course, since I believe in this one, okay, here's the record of major wars. See that little, that's this. See there's a little gray, red area? That's the condition in which people are equal. All major wars took place under those conditions. Every single one, all the way from Napoleon. And you've been saying exactly the opposite. I like it. Evidence does not dissuade you. And by the way, you're not just Russians, Americans, Frenchmen, they say it in really long sentences, okay? It's nonsense. I'm not saying this theory is right. I can tell you that the opposite theory is wrong. It's falsified. So what we are in right now is we don't know what does it. That's the answer. Anyway, so now we go to statistics, right? Remember the stats that you learned? This is the simplest. It's called non-parametric statistics. You go 1, war, 0, no war, right? Because you're just dummy, so why not? Okay, so if you look at this one, it says, when you are unequal, no wars among major powers, ever. When you're equal and no overtaking, that is, you're sort of equal, like this, okay? No wars, and people just keep insulting each other. Cold War, don't you like that one? Okay. When you're equal and overtaking, this theory would have loved to have 10 at the bottom, right? Nope, half and half. So it says its satisfaction must be in the other cases, the 5 cases that you missed. They must have been satisfied. The 2 big guys were sort of happy, like the English and the Americans, they like each other. Right? And That's why I didn't fight. This is 1980. Now that's almost 40 years ago. It's penetrating, finally, into the discipline. Okay, so what do you do once you have that one? You get complicated. Because if you don't get complicated, nobody publishes you. Okay? So now you take all of the MIDS data set, which all of you know, right? No? Singular and small create a thing called COW, Correlates of War, and it's in the Penn State University. Click on it, it'll give you every single war, how many people died in every single war, who was participating, how long was the duration, blah, 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 blah. All of those measures are available for you on a click, if you know how to click. Okay. So what this theory now says, if you only look at great powers and you add satisfaction, you account for 88% of the variance. You're missing something. Okay. If you look at the political relevant dyads, that is people who keep sort of insulting each other, okay? So, because otherwise you're putting everybody into it. You end up with 82% of the variance. So we're insulting each other recently, right? Americans, you're bad, and you're, yeah. So if you look at those relevant dyads, you explain 82% of the variance with two things, satisfaction and parity. If you look at Bueno Mosquito's work, he explains 95% of the variance for escalation of conflict. And I know that many of you have never heard of it. 92% of the variance. It's phenomenal. Okay, don't want to bother you, but just so you can have a little relaxation. You've all heard that you can lie with statistics, right? Every single person who does case studies say, don't trust statistics because you can lie with them. Here is a great one. See, notice that is a number of Nobel laureates per 1,000 million people, and here is how much consumption of chocolate they have. Notice I eat a lot of chocolate. Why? Hope. See how nice this is? The more you eat, the smarter you get. Do you believe that? Why? It's statistically strong. It's important for you to understand that statistics test the proposition. That's all it does. So you can run statistical analysis from here to eternity, and something will come out, okay? Which may be totally idiotic, just because there is a high correlation. Remember, it's 95% certain that this is correct. It's 5% that it came from a random collection. They say, for instance, that if 1,000 monkeys wrote 1,000 books, one of them may have written a piece of Shakespeare. I don't know. But notice that we're not saying Shakespeare's are monkeys. Anyway, monkeys, anyway, you know the point. Statistics test your propositions. Statistics are not sufficient to give you anything other than non-causal inferences. And the other problem with statistics is that we have, for the duration of since 1960s, concentrated on linear things. So you do more linear, because it's easy. We know how to do it. We give you all kinds of nice tests and this and the other. But most of us believe that the relationship between us are nonlinear, that we do something and then you do more, okay? And it doesn't. So think of sugar, right? Some of you drink coffee with sugar and spoil it. Okay, I noticed that among the Russians. Anyway, so you put a little bit of one of those things in coffee, it's better. What about 2? Well, it's getting a little bad, right? What about 3? Notice that the more you put, the less you like it. Eventually you throw it out. Okay. So this is a question of marginalities. And we know that many of our interests are nonlinear. Think of money. Okay? I'll give you $100 to stay in this lecture until the end. Okay? Most of you, I hope, will stay, okay, despite the poverty of the information. Okay? Now, what about if I say, I'll give you $200 to stay here overnight? Well, some of you might. Okay? What about I say, I'll give you $250 to stay here for the next week? I think I'm going to have increased loss of population. Okay? And I'm still wondering whether I'm going to be able to persuade you to stay. I don't trust this man. It's too sophisticated. Okay. So now we want to go to sort of a formalizing, and I'm not going to explain this formalizing model. Oh, sophisticated. So I now. Wonderful. Okay. So I am now into high technology from Russia. Thank you. Okay. So this is a derived structure of systematic models which says the following. Let's take a look at transitions and look at the foreign policies the countries follow concurrently. Okay. And trust me, it is derived, but I won't do it because it's too complex. So here, this is the pictures that emerge. Okay. Remember that we said this is, I did not put the Russia up because I thought that some tomatoes would fly. So I decided to put China. Okay? And up on top is the relationship that they have, and on bottom are the results. So it says, if China doesn't catch up to the United States, it's going to be stable. Formally. If, let's see what you if China is cooperating, even if it catches up, there will be no conflict. Isn't that nice? Exactly what we remember we decided that satisfaction does. Now you can formally derive it. Number 3, if there are mutual traits, if they are nice people, status quo people, okay, there's going to be a lot of tomato being thrown, but no war. And I need to get to war. Finally. Okay. If the US is aggressive, or if China is very aggressive, you're going to have a conflict when this transition occurs. And there are consequences. You can read this in Abdullahian and Kang. I recommend it. It'll take a little while if your math is not so hot. But if your math is pretty hot, you'll immediately know it and you can extend it. What's important about what we've been doing up to now is that you accumulate. Remember that little thing that we did in 1980? A little 2x2 little table, anybody understands? Well, that's where it's going right now. And then the next generation is going to go much further. So the first one, I hope all of you understood. I am hoping that at least 5% of this population understood the last one. Okay? Because I didn't say that. Okay. So now let's talk about deductive model. The big deductive model that we have now in international politics and in economics, to a large degree, is called rational choice. And the reason for this one is because it's been very successful across fields, not just in economics, but in sociology and increasingly in political science. And it's very, very simple. It says the following. You have preferences. All of you have preferences. You go to ice cream parlors, right? So you're like a little kid and say, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. That's preferences, okay? You have to make a choice. Once you have that, when you have to have ordered preferences, that is, A must be bigger than B, because at some point, B and C and C over D. Okay. If you have a little critter, that takes a long time. Okay. They're sitting there. Oh, strawberry, no, vanilla, no, this. Okay. They're having great difficulty making their final order. And finally, they order. And we argue the following. This is the only assumption of rationality, that if you choose A over B, you will by definition choose A over C. Seems reasonable, right? It's a very fundamental assumption. It allows you to solve. Because without this assumption, you're irrational. You've heard of irrational people? I love people who tell me, well, the international system is not rational, it's irrational. You know what that means? They have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on. Zero. Because A chooses B, then B chooses C, then C chooses A. So on the basis of the preference information that you have on A, B, and C, you are giving 33% probability that any one of these three things will happen. So what have you added by knowing preferences? Zero. So anybody who tells you people in international politics are irrational, or only Americans are rational, but Greeks are not. I've heard this one particularly. It's never us who are irrational. You know, we're rational people. But, you know, Chinese, obscure minds. North Koreans, you know, they act irrationally. If that's the case, throw your hands up. You have no forecasting capability for them with this kind of models. So you would have to create irrational models. So I believe that if you argue that, you should create irrational models. Otherwise, don't talk like that. Because people who sort of, it's like saying gravity doesn't exist. So you say, well, it's true, right? If you go to space, you throw the thing and it flies. So I would actually run a test. It says, you put your foot out, there's a bowling ball here, drop it on it 10 times. If it doesn't hit you 10 times, fine. After the fifth time, I think you'll quit. Okay. Is that clear? This is the reason why you make these assumptions. Do I believe these assumptions to be true? No. And let me give you an example. If you have a little critter, your own critter, okay, and you're crossing the street, and here comes this huge truck, and you realize he's not stopping. He should have, right? The light is okay. So what do? Do you throw your kid and die? Or do you jump and let your critter go? Which way? Here's a nice rationalist. Why? Of course I can have another critter. But all of you deep down there say, I wouldn't do that. I am really an altruist. In that situation, I'm going to act irrationally. And there are all kinds of examples of this. You know, soldiers, right? Somebody draws a grenade and there are 4 soldiers and one of them drops on top of the grenade. He should have jumped out, but he doesn't. We know people are altruistic, but that's the error term. So this model should account for most of the variance, not all. Okay, so let me try you on arms cooperation. See if you can actually do this one. Okay, this is an arms race where you know we're all sort of trying to compete. You build, I build, that kind of stuff. Okay, so here are your options. The U.S. arm, the Russians arm, okay, which is more or less what we're doing. Okay, the U.S. doesn't arm, the Russians don't arm. We disarm both of us. Okay. The U.S. arms, the Russians don't arm. So we get bigger and bigger, and you get smaller and smaller. And U.S. arms and Russians arm. Okay, why don't you put your numbers, put a piece of paper and say, what would be best? 4 is the most you can get. 1 is the worst option you have. I'll give you a minute to think about that. I am counting the minute. Actually, I am giving you a minute. This is a test. Half a minute, 30 seconds to go. Terrible. Okay. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds.
Are refugees best for who?
From each side. The Russians and payoff for the US, payoff for Russia.
Because like basically what's happening, those parts will be proliferating because that's the prisoner's dilemma.
Ah, wonderful. So see, you're over-educated. There are the payoffs. And if you compare it to your payoffs, it should be that way. The Russians love for the US to disarm as long as they arm. The Americans would prefer to arm because we're obviously good people, right? We would never use it. It's only you can use it. We're peace lovers. Isn't that what you say? We never attack anybody, except Crimea. Anyway, and here we have no arms and no arms. We both make money that way. We save. We can give it to our retiring population. And the last one is the US arms and the Russians arm. Okay, so it makes no sense to get $2 if you could get 3, doesn't it? Okay, so let's take a look at the game theoretical solution. You put 3, 3, okay, that's you and me, that's me and you. You just set it up in a little 2x2 game. And I don't have a pointer. But the best outcome is clearly 3, 3, right? We both make money, we don't spend money, we don't waste it. But the moment I have 3, I say, hey, if I cheat and I go to 4, I can beat the hell out of that guy, right? But when I go to 4, what happens? The other guy reacts and builds himself. This one is the Nash solution. The top one is the Pareto optimal. If we want peace, it's easy to get. We just don't want it. We want peace on our terms. Your terms or my terms. Doesn't make any difference. That's why we keep competing. Notice this is a very simple Nash solution. But because the solution is so consistent, people keep using it. And I'll drop this one. And what they've done is they've generalized this into more complex models. Because 2x2 games are silly. You don't fight 2 people. You're in the middle of the international system. So it's a bunch of people like this, right? All of you have different preferences. You're from Africa, and over there is Asia, and somewhere here is US, and somewhere here is Australia. And they're all pushing in different directions. They want kangaroos, you don't, and on and on. Okay? So you have this complex world. And as a consequence, you need to count a lot of people, many stakeholders. So you list them all, people who are interested in this outcome. In the Middle East, as I'll show you in a minute if I have time, it's close to about 70 agents who are sort of trying to play the game. And you want to know 3 things. Influence, which is power. Remember we used that one? How influential are they? They may want something, but they're midgets, so it doesn't count. So how influential are they? Okay. The next one is what position they take. Are they in favor of something or against something, whatever it is that you're debating? And the last thing is, how important is it to you? Okay. So I've discussed this Crimea with some of you, and you say, well, Putin was smart. He knows the Americans don't care. Right? How much do you care about Guatemala? Interesting, isn't it? Why don't they care? Because not Guatemala. So you can be smaller and get away with a lot. So it's an interesting, important issue. How much do you care? And we don't usually put that in politics. We just simply try to analyze how large you are. Well, that's silly. Okay. So this model now says, let me see if I can go through it a little bit. So first you list your actors, you determine their positions, you determine their influence, and you figure out how important these issues are. You create this structure in which you have somebody supporting this side, somebody supporting the other side, and the size of these things is the influence times the salience. So how big I am, given how much I care. You could be really big and don't care. Consequently, you're not influential. Your actions in Guatemala tell me that. But in Ukraine, you are very influential because you care, we don't. The first thing is you have to have theorems behind you. Otherwise, this is just blabberdizing. This is called the median voter theorem. And you know, I set it up this way because we have an election in the United States right now, right? The people who select the Democrats and the people who select the Republicans are a tiny fraction of the US. Less than 20% people are sufficiently motivated to go to primaries. Okay. So out there are the Republicans, and down here are the Democrats. Tiny little group. Okay. In order to attract them, you have to make extreme claims. The Republicans love guns. Okay. They are against abortion. They are, you know, you've heard all this. Okay, they're against immigration. So you have to say, oh, I will kill all Mexicans, I will kill everybody who walks in, and if you don't look like me, I don't want you. Okay? The other guys, oh, women must be equal. If you're not equal, blah, blah. There is a 25% difference in salary. It must be to 0, otherwise we will kill you next week. Okay? We really love people who have different preferences which are sexual. They have to have the same rights, otherwise the country will collapse. Okay? And on and on and on. We need health, and it has to be centralized. It has to be distributed to everybody who doesn't have health. Okay? So we have sort of these different positions, and they're sort of so strongly held that people actually, you know, they'll die over it. Now, the moment that happens, the end of the election, which is likely to be Trump and Clinton, they're suddenly going to say, oh, I really didn't mean it. What I meant to say is that some Mexicans might be excluded under some circumstances which are not yet well defined. Okay? And Mrs. Clinton would come in and say, well, yeah, health is a good idea, but we've really advanced a lot, and we should basically institutionalize this thing. They'll go to the middle because that's where the majority of the population is that votes. And they don't want to lose the election. So they'll change their mind. So when you say politicians are shifty, they are. The reason they're shifty is they're going to the median voter. They're trying to get elected. And this is the same thing if I knew anything about Russia, which I don't. Okay? On the basis of this one, you calculate the risk propensity of individuals. And the way you distinguish this, and this is very important, if you're willing to take high risks, okay, you're going to be way up there in that red line and saying, I want my issue, I want my issue, I want my issue, until I break you up. If you're risk averse, you got that yellow line. I don't care what you do, okay, until you really push me. And the middle guy is sort of neutral. Okay. So the advantage of being a risk taker is that you make enormous claims and you put yourself way out there. But just like in gambling, risk takers get their head taken off every so often because they gamble once too many. Okay. Risk-averse people will start conflicts when they are going to be overwhelming. Remember Reagan? He heroically took over some little island, which I even don't remember anymore, right next to the United States. What's that? No, he didn't go to Nicaragua, that's too big. Right next to Cuba, there was a little. Well, it'll come back. He was totally risk averse. Remember when he threatened the Russians with massive retaliation because of the shooting of the plane? What did he actually do? Do you know? He had all planes were flying to Korea, move over 300 miles and come around and come in this way. Of course, he didn't report it. Just because you talk doesn't mean you do. Actually, the risk taker among American presidents was Carter, and when he tried to rescue the hostages in Iraq, because the probability of success was very low. But you have very different perceptions just because Okay, it's nice. Okay, then you calculate, and this is the important part, you calculate the expected utility of each one of these actions. Up there in that top quadrant is you believe that if you fight, you win. But you expect to fight. I expect a confrontation with you. I know you're going to confront me, but I think I can win. And that's conflict, because it's very valuable to me, it's very valuable to you. That's one way to solve the problem. When you are in that bottom quadrant underneath A and B, in the middle, if I ask you for this much and you're willing to give this much, we negotiate. You do not negotiate if the other side is unwilling to give you anything, because there's nothing to negotiate on. If you're below that, in that between closer to B, I can impose on you. So I'm making a demand which is this little, and you know that left to your own devices, I can kill you. So assume that you're in a parking lot out there, picking up your car, and somebody puts a pistol in the back of your head and says, please give me your watch. And you calculate, well, if I don't give him the watch, he takes the car as well as he takes my money. Please take this one. Don't forget to wind it. Okay. That's called yielding. Deterrence is in this minus. We both believe that we got into a fight, we're all going to be very sorry. There's going to be high cost to it. So consequently, what you want to do is not fight. Not because I like you, I really don't, okay? But if we fight, I'm going to be worse off and so will you. And up in the other side is advantages to the opponent. Many of my colleagues have now come up with this notion of win-win. It's sexy, isn't it? Let's get an, I'm sure that you learned that, right? You're in diplomacy, you're supposed to win-win. It's baloney. A win-win only happens in the negotiating structure, which is a tiny portion of the spectrum. If you want something that I want, Palestinians and Israelis, it's a little difficult to tell them that they're going to win-win. Otherwise, they would have solved it. They're not stupid. So these kind of words have no backing. You've heard about soft power, I hope, right? It's come all the way to Russia. God help you. Okay. Soft power can only be used against somebody who doesn't want to fight you. It's simply, it's nonsense. You can only have soft power against somebody you trust. So I can trust the English and they trust me. I can use soft power. No problem. I don't think I can use it on the Russians. Do you think I could go over to Mr. Putin and say, Mr. Putin, I don't agree with your position, so would you please move out of Crimea? And do you think it would be very useful? But you read all this crap. Anyway, I didn't say that. Okay, so let's see what these things do. What these things do, and they claim to do, and they do, is you give me the base numbers, and I will give you a forecast on the basis of the movements of actors which are pressing against each other. Okay? So here is a situation in which it used to go chuk, 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 chuk. Anyway, so what it does, it takes the base case and then forecasts the next case and the next case and the next case, and it stops when the adjustment that you can get through negotiation is less than 1% of your previous adjustment. So you're getting nothing from negotiating, and nobody wants to get nothing, and I'm almost finished. So I decided to give you Assad. This was done in 2013, okay? This is the baseline. These are all of the actors that were involved. Mr. Assad is here on the left, and the Americans are all the way on the right. They're trying to get rid of him. See? Okay. As time goes by, we said Assad is going to consolidate his position. Contrary to everybody else, read the newspaper, at least American newspapers. I don't know what the Russians did. Maybe the Russians said the opposite, and you were right by accident. Okay. And notice there's a concentration here of, it's in favor of Mr. Assad. Okay, so we said, okay, let's just play games, and let's see if I can bomb him, you know, like you guys are. Get 50% of it off. Okay? What's going to happen? Well, not much. Sad, isn't it? Okay. What about if I increase support for the Free Syrian Army, the guys you are bombing? Okay? And we are saying, oh, don't bomb them because you should bomb ISIS, not free, right? Isn't that? Yeah. This is just a policy decision. Notice, it gets a little better. But you would have to trust the Free Army. I can keep increasing that, and that's going to draw this guy out. But they're back in here. This is not solvable by, you know, I know that there's been a long debate, I don't know, in here, about what would have happened if Mr. Obama had bombed after the gas event, and if he had stood his red line and nada. He would be embroiled. He was actually quite smart. But I'm sure that there would be 6 opinions here about exactly the opposite, with no theoretical proof. Now, can I prove the simulations? No. If the event did not take place, it's just my claim. Except, we've done, oh, by the way, this would be the distribution that happens to the US. If you're thinking, is it going to be pro-US or anti-US? See, at the end, it's, you know, we're sort of up there, see up in the top. If we had succeeded, you know what would be left over? A mess. We would want that, somebody else would want something else. There would not be a coalition helping Americans to get whatever they want. We'd end up with another Iraq, sorry. Okay. Iraq, please erase that. Well, I won't torture anymore. But if you have more issues than just one, then you end up with multiple issues, and it's called win sets. And you do exactly the same thing, except it's a little bit more math. And I wanted to show you this one. This is before Putin got elected, okay? And this is before Putin gets elected. Who was around? Yeltsin? Yeltsin was around, right? And Putin ran for office. Anyway, and you recall that the Americans wanted to get anti-ballistic missiles in space. Remember that? And at that time, we thought of the Chechens as freedom fighters. Remember that? Okay. See how things change. Anyway, I was there in, I should have put the date, but it is before Putin, it's right before the election process. Okay. And we just were playing around because you don't have anything else to do, right? Why not? And we said, okay, we have a really difference on Chechen's autonomy, and we have a real difference on ABMs, and we can't resolve either one of those 2 issues. Okay, we're really stuck. Mrs. Condoleezza Rice was coming and going. Oh, let me take those things. I said, no, yet. Okay, and you guys were going, don't support the Chechens. This is not reasonable. No. Okay, so it was a continuing. I know that you know that history, right? Because if you don't know that, you flank here. Okay, so we ran this analysis, and we noticed that if the US pulled back on autonomy, that is declared Chechens terrorists, Russians would say, no problem on IBM. See that little green thing? Okay, this was 2 years before, and we got laughed out as usual, okay, from a community like yours. You don't understand Russians, you don't understand Chechens, I don't even know where they are. Okay, so it was sort of the usual. And then exactly after 9/11, what did we do? We declared the Chechens terrorists. How long did it take the Russians to allow us to put missiles in space? 2 weeks. Check it out. If you do systematic analysis, you will find things that people, now we didn't anticipate this. I didn't know. I didn't know about 9/11, trust me. If I did, I would have told them something. Okay. The idea is it's important that you pay attention to the likelihood of success. So this is the last slide, I swear. Okay, and this is the slide which says, where have we applied this? What kind of issues have we analyzed? And you can find them in published literature. So it's not hidden somewhere in the bowels of the CIA or somebody else. Okay? It's available to you for exploration and analysis and reassessment. All of these countries, Bolivia, Sudan, Venezuela, Taiwan, South Korea, North Korea, blah, blah, Syria, Iraq, Iran, blah, 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 okay, using exactly the same model, not knowledge about those areas, with exactly the same accuracy. That should scare the hell out of you. Because if you don't know it, you'll become obsolete in your lifetime. Because you'll know a lot about Afghanistan, you'll know nothing about Bolivia, and somebody will be able to analyze Bolivia and Afghanistan. I can see that I get this big smile, which means it's time for questions. Any questions? Boy, you're intimidated. You're the only one who talks. No ahead. Yes, sir.
I love to talk. Trump or Clinton?
Oh, Clinton. Easy. Now, Trump is likely to win, after a little fight at the Republicans. If the Republicans don't do that, it's not going to be Cruz. So the only other guy who could emerge was Ryan. If they do that, it's probably implode the Republican Party. And the middle of the Republicans, because Clinton is on that distribution I showed you before, so that you don't think I'm just making this up. So it's not my personal opinion. On this distribution, Clinton is on the beyond the median at this point. Okay, so I would forecast. I don't do elections, but unless some major trauma happens, they find that he slept with her mother or something. What happened with Clinton, right? If short of a scandal, okay, the expectation is something 55 to 57, which in American elections is a landslide, because you would probably win almost every state, with probably the exception of Texas and Alabama and places like that. So that would be a huge. If the Republicans manage to get Ryan in, and he becomes Mr. Clean, I think it's 50-50. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the lecture. I have a question about quantitative and qualitative
Yeah.
studies. So in Russia, there is actually kind of consensus about, especially in international relations theory, that you can get the same results with qualitative studies than with quantitative ones, but with less efforts, less money, less application limits. What's your opinion on that?
It's not opinion. I don't have opinions. I suggest you read Stan Fader on comparing the quality of forecast based on systematic analysis and the SMEs, which are basically qualitative. But let me be careful here. In some situations, there's no way of doing quantitative analysis. But the problem with people have is that they think quantitative analysis are lots of big numbers. It's not. If you look at how you collect this data, you take an SME, somebody who really knows what they're talking about, and tell me, okay, Assad is here at 0. How far is from here is his brother? So he's almost the same. Okay. And what's the other extreme? Oh, those are the crazy Americans and the crazy Israelis. Okay, that's how you got it. So you're using qualitative information, they're just quantifying. Some people are very uncomfortable. Just give them a line, then they're happy. And then you sort of measure it. Okay. But there are situations in which you can't do that. So I'm not trying to dismiss qualitative studies, but they're very limited because you can't compare. So if you're a really good qualitative person, you have some clock in your head which allows you to understand the behavior of individuals in the area you're studying. So let's say you're a specialist on the Middle East, okay, and you understand the Saudis and this. And I say, okay, tell me, how do you come up with this? Oh, well, it's complicated. So, which is really the answer. It's actually the real answer. It's not making up. And then I say, okay, can I use whatever you are using in order to understand the Chinese? Yeah, you must be kidding. Okay? So it's very difficult to use your knowledge and his knowledge on China and put it together to make some policies which would then apply to the Middle East and China concurrently. So that's the advantage of formalizing, that you can compare and contrast and have a common language that people who don't have your information can use. But I really don't want to end up saying quantify everything, but if you want to really be cruel, everything is quantifiable. And so love, people tell me love can't be quantified, right? Okay, so I'd say, she loves me not, 0, 1, done, okay? It's not a very powerful numerics, but it's been quantified. Okay, and how do I know? She shows up. See, it's just the way you think. If you think it can't be quantified, you're likely to think in terms of many dimensions at the same time. And the problem is, the reason SMEs have problems is because they have too much information. And they're thinking of 6 or 7 dimensions at the same time without any structure. So my expectation for the future is that some really smart kid, either here or in China or in the US, somewhere, is going to come up with a very good way of specifying dimensions, the dimensions we care about. And once we have a generalized conception of dimensions across societies, we're going to be able to do far more than we can now. But I really don't want to caution is analysis is not policy. I can analyze and saying what you're doing right now is optimal. You should surrender, okay? And you say, I don't want to surrender. That's a policy decision. And I say, but it's going to be very costly. And I say, I understand it's going to be very costly. So think of Stalin in Stalingrad. Hey, he could have surrendered, right? Minimize losses, do on and on. That's why we remember Stalingrad. High risk, high exposure, major cost, eventual outcome, which is favorable. Without that, I don't think we might have not won World War II, which most people somehow keep forgetting about the Russian front. So when you do this analysis, you suddenly figure out it isn't Normandy. This is our story, right? We saved Europe, blah, 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 with Normandy invasion, blah, 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 and John Wayne and stuff like that. I'm sure you have the John Wayne story here, okay, that we don't see, and you don't see ours. It would be nice to write a real story about World War II and the contribution of each one of these parties to see how they actually integrate and then disintegrate. Anybody else? Well, you're either shy or this is a really poor lecture.
Is it an assumption?
It's an assumption, yes. I somehow doubt that. What's that?
I just want to ask you, I don't want to get too theoretical, but what you were saying about rational theory, rational action, which is presumably the basis of your calculations. What do you think about the prospect
Well, yes, in effect it is used. Prospect theory has a very different conception of risk. The standard conception of risk is that it's sort of a continuous function. Prospect theory through experiments has shown that if I manage to injure you, okay, you lose something, you suddenly become far more determined to recover what you lost. So it's sort of counterintuitive. Losses produce risk-taking characteristics in the individual. And so you have to be very careful about people who lost, because suddenly they're going to be far more motivated and they're going to take actions that they otherwise wouldn't have taken. No, so that is very good. The second part of prospect theory, I think, is not so hard, because they're not derived. It's sort of intuitively produced. But there are really serious problems with Nash solutions. There's been a lot of experimental work, particularly in Caltech, and Vernon Smith, who got a Nobel Prize for it, which suggests that individuals don't follow Nash. That is, we test you to see whether you act as if you're Nash, and particularly in the case of women, they're nice. They're about 75% altruist, and they will take risks that they will lose, not in successive games, but in single point games, which means that people are much nicer than we think they are. Okay. The problem is that the more educated, sophisticated you become, so if you're a Wall Street type, or for that matter, a diplomat, you approach Nash much more. You don't become nicer, you become tougher, because you start calculating much more. People are more sort of intuitive, and the more you learn, the nastier you become. Okay. Well, that's just experimental results. So there's now sort of attempts to figure out, is there a way of enhancing your cooperative behavior? Okay. All the way from cuckoo things like they spray you with a thing and make you friendly, okay, to more of a learning procedure type. But it's quite clear that the theories we currently have, I hope, will be dramatically revised by the time this generation is over. Okay. If you think this is the end, no, this is just the beginning. And the question becomes, do you get on the boat or do you stay in the previous boat of description? So I hope you move on to the point of explanation.